So, good morning, and thank you all for being here today. This is an important day for us because we launch our first project, as I said, Liberal Dialogues is a transnational educational and civic initiative designed for young people with the aim to foster critical debate, regional cooperation, capacity building, and especially to foster the dialogue and the reconciliation in a time marked by the resurgence of nationalism, authoritarian shifts, and democratic stress. Let me spend just a few words about the observatory and why we choose to start in Trieste. Trieste is a city of border and encounters. The choice of Trieste is also a vision, is to foster dialogue and the cooperation, especially between young people. So the Southeast Europe Observatory was launched by the Fondazione Luigi Einaudi from Rome in partnership with MIP's Trieste School of Management, who gave also the observatory the seat. The main objective is to monitor and support democratic resilience across Southeast Europe. Its mission is to analyze political, social, and economic trends and to promote cross-border cooperation. In this mission, we received also the support of the Open Society Foundation, Western Balkans, and Generali, and the observatory benefits also from the support for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and European Commission. So our primary objective is also to build network and cooperation also in local level, at the local level. So our project Liberal Dialogues is organized also with the contribution of the University of Trieste and the patronage of Regione Friuli Venezia Giulia e Comune di Trieste. We are also in contact with the Central European Initiative with which we share common objectives and also hope to collaborate in future projects. We are also, for next stages, in contact and in touch with local universities in all areas from Slovenia, Croatia to Southeastern Europe area, with all organizations also involved in the European integration process. So before introducing our speakers, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Vladimir Nanut, the CEO and General Director of MIP Trieste School of Management, who is hosting the observatory and who is hosting us today. MIP immediately supported the idea of establishing this observatory, and maybe Mr. Nanut can explain why.
Thank you, Eva. Good morning to everybody. On behalf of MIP Trieste School of Management, it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this first event organized by the Southeast Europe Observatory, event dedicated to the roots of liberal thought. Now, it isn't my place to speak about the matter. I am a manager professor, and my peculiar word is business and leadership. My task is taking care of the people who will shape the economy and the society of tomorrow. In fact, the mission of MIP Trieste School of Management is to develop the next generation of managers and entrepreneurs, young men and women who come to Trieste from every corner of the world to attend programs like the MBA in International Business or the Master in Insurance and Risk Management. They come to Trieste to acquire the skill and the knowledge they need to grow professionally and personally. And at the end, they leave our school with the tools, the perspective, and the confidence to make a real difference in their jobs and in their lives. Our strong commitment to quality of programs and teaching methodologies that reflected also in our international qualification and accreditation place MIB among the leading business schools in Italy and in Europe. And yet, there is something more I want to underline. All our programs and training activities are based on the values of liberal democracy. That's to say, on the liberal principle of the market economy. We believe in a society where political freedom and economic freedom work together within a clear and responsible regulatory framework. It isn't just an academic background, it's the lens through which we teach our students to manage organizations that perform efficiently, responsibly, sustainably, with the purpose of generating value for everyone, for shareholders, for employees, for customers and communities, for suppliers and for society at large. And yet, economic performance alone is never enough. We always remind our students that how you succeed matters as much as whether you succeed. In this sense, integrity, competence, merit, accountability, solidarity, respect are not soft words, but the backbone of everything we teach. We also tell our students that without commitment, without sacrifice, without determination and passion, ambitions remain just a dream. It never becomes reality. Finally, I deeply believe that the difficult and uncertain times we are living in also require courage, hope, and trust. We must be aware that the main challenge we are facing today is defending principles and values of democracy. With regard to that spirit, I wish you a truly meaningful day here at MIB Trieste School of Management. That, I remind, it's also the home of Southeast Europe Observatory. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nanut. And now I will invite on the floor Andrea Cangini, is the Secretary General of the Fondazione Luigi Einaudi and the Director of the Southeast Europe Observatory.
Thank you, Eva. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first meeting of the Liberal Dialogues organized by the Southeast Europe Observatory. The Luigi Einaudi Foundation strongly believes in this initiative. We believe in it because, as President Luigi Einaudi theorized and demonstrated in practice, we believe in liberalism as the only method capable of guaranteeing the full development of human person in context of peace and economic growth. We believe in it because we believe that the importance of study and continuous comparison between different theses. We believe in it because we believe in the moral duty to pass on skills to younger people in order to make them truly free women and men. And at least we believe in it because we believe in European unity as the only guarantee of peace and development for our beloved old continent. We are clearly in year zero of history. An old geopolitical order was collapsed, a new order is struggling to establish itself. The global scene seems dominated by resurgent old empires and ancient democracies apparently exposed to the risk of gradual shift towards authoritarianism. For years now, the Balkans have been subject to disinformation and economic influence from Russian Federation and China. The result is a dangerous resurgence of separatism, nationalism, anti-Europeanism, and potentially armed conflicts. The Balkans risk returning being a powder keg of Europe that they were in 1914. This scenario is in stark contrast to the material and the spiritual interest of the people of the so-called Balkan states, of Italy as well, and of course of the Europe as a whole. In our opinion, Europe must fully embrace every single Balkan state as soon as possible. We believe that spreading liberal thinking and the European ideals is the most effective way to prevent this gloomy scenario from coming to pass and to ensure that the new geopolitical order is based on the key principles of the liberal constitutional state. So, dear students, happy liberal dialogues to you.
Thank you, Andrea. Andrea Cangini, the director of Southeast Europe Observatory. So connecting students, also professionals, with peers and experts across borders and sharing ideas, exchanging ideas is one of the main goals of liberal dialogues. And there is also the intention to provide young people with training on the principles of liberal culture, method, and also European values. This is one of the reasons why the European Commission has supported us from the very beginning of the project, offering for the next events in Ljubljana and so on, in Belgrade, Podgorica, and Tirana, also the use of their local offices, the European houses. So we will be in the European houses on our trip to Southeast Europe. So we listen now to Valentina Superti, the European Commission Director for Western Balkans, who sent us this message.
It is an honor for me to represent the European Commission on this important occasion, the launch of the Liberal Dialogues program promoted by the Luigi Einaudi Foundation and the Open Society Foundations in the Western Balkans. In an age of rapid transformation and growing uncertainty, liberal dialogue remains a key element for the vitality of our democracies. And liberalism, understood as a method of open and respectful confrontation between different ideas, is not a theoretical abstraction. It is the foundation of strong institutions, inclusive societies, and decision-making processes based on freedom of thought and civic responsibility. A key figure in the panorama of Italian and European liberal thought was Luigi Einaudi, economist and statesman, whose cultural heritage still inspires the promotion of individual freedoms, pluralism, and rational discussion in the public sphere. The Luigi Einaudi Foundation, named after his memory, works precisely to spread and update this intellectual heritage of ideas by promoting liberalism as a tool for responding to the contemporary challenges of globalization and social and economic complexity. Globally, the Open Society Foundations embody a practical commitment to open and democratic societies. This international network of foundations supports groups and initiatives that promote democratic practices, human rights, justice, and freedom of expression, working with civic organizations to strengthen citizen participation and accountability of institutions. The EU is actively supporting the Western Balkan partners in their path of democratic reforms and moving closer to the European perspective through instruments such as the Growth Plan and technical and financial assistance for socio-economic convergence with the European Union. The European Commission promotes reforms based on the values of the rule of law, good governance, and regional cooperation, which are considered essential for the enlargement of the Union and lasting stability in the region. And these contributions, from Einaudi's theoretical reflection to the civic action of the Open Society Foundations to European policies in the Western Balkans, do show that liberal dialogue is not only an abstract ideal, but a concrete resource for promoting democracy, stability, and international cohesion. Defending and cultivating this dialogue means investing in the future of our communities and strengthening an international order founded on the shared values of freedom, dignity, and mutual respect. I wish you and all the participants a path of growth and intellectual enrichment. And thank you so much for your commitment to promoting the values on which our European Union is founded.
So now to our lessons, but before we start, let me introduce Alberto Mingardi, Emma Galli, and Arrigo Bonifacio. I will introduce you later a little bit better. But before we start, I would like to remember that all information about our project, including the schedule for next lessons, are available on our website. And remember also that at the end of this lesson, you can submit a more or less 5,000 characters report or reflection on the theme, how to build the Europe I would like. So your idea of Europe, a scientific committee will evaluate your contributions, your written reports, and winners are invited then to our annual forum, which will be held in September with representatives of European Union ministers and experts. Now, I give the floor to Alberto Mingardi. He will, he's the director of the Istituto Bruno Leoni. He's a full professor of history and political doctrines at the EULM University in Milan. And you can find also the whole biography on our website. And he will talk us about the roots of liberal thought. Please.
Well, thank you very much, Eva, and thank you so much, Andrea and the Fondazione Einaudi for this invitation. It's a wonderful place to be. It's really a magnificent lecture also. It's a privilege to be here and to be here with you. So, the roots of liberal thought. I promise a very short introduction, okay? I may speak for 5 or 6 days about the subject, but we'll keep it short. So the big question, before even thinking about the roots of liberal thought, is why should we consider this important? Why are political ideas important at all? I suppose that, some of you may have an interest in this, because if you didn't, you wouldn't be here. But assume that you don't. Why does this matter? Well, I'll give you an answer, which is this. There is one great thing which is peculiar to the modern world. It's different than what we knew for virtually all of our history. And that's economic growth. Basically, economic growth was alien as an experience to communities living in Europe, living here, up to the late 18th century. The mid-19th century. Yes, you got better years, you got worse years, better harvest, worse harvest, but basically economic growth was flat. This is a famous graph which is called the hockey stick because of its shape, and that's global GDP per capita over the long run. And as you can see, GDP per capita starts rising this is the world. If it was a graph about Europe, it would be around 1830, 1836, 1840, something like that. But when you consider the world as such, it's later on, okay? Interestingly enough, if you were looking at a graph about the size of world population, it will have exactly the same shape. Why? Because you need some wealth. You need really economic growth in order to have hygiene, to have child mortality collapsing. And so what basically happens in Europe is, as soon as we start to have economic growth, the European population quintuples in 1 century. Okay? Why did this happen? Why we had something that we call the Industrial Revolution, and after that we have this spreading of wealth all over the world? Well, Professor Deirdre McCloskey was a very distinguished economic historian. Here she is properly pictured with the menu of a restaurant in Milan called Liberty. She maintains that, this was not the fact that coal was abundant in England. It was not the fact that labor was expensive in England and so people needed to develop machinery. But the great engine behind economic growth was ideas. It's a similar thesis of that of last year Nobel laureate Joel Mokyr. The idea is that ideas matter. Why? Because as Professor McCloskey says here, she calls this phenomenon that we see over here the great enrichment. The fact that the people all over the world starts getting richer and richer year by year. The very fact that, all of you basically expect that next year you'll have a better iPhone than the one that you have this year, that your wearables will be telling you more stuff, that your diet is going to be improving, that the wine you're drinking, can I speak about wine in a business school? I know about that, but still, that the wine you'll be drinking will be safer and better for you, that your drugs will actually keep you healthier in time. This thing is what we call economic growth. And as Professor McCloskey pointed out in a gigantic set of books that you're not required to read, it's enough if you listen to me. What changes at a certain moment in history is that people are given a possibility to be creative. Not just the great artists, not just the great philosophers, but also people in business. Also people whose creativity transforms the way in which products are made and sold and distributed all over the world. So as Professor McCloskey says, the great enrichment did not have anything to do with the accumulation of capital, the old Marxist thesis. It was caused by ideas. The broad idea of liberalism gave workers and the middle class the rights, agency, and dignity needed to release their own creative forces. Dignity is a key word. One thing that changes, even in culture like ours, that because of politics and because of religion, we tend to be quite dismissive of people in business. Business is not seen as a noble pursuit. It was terrible before. I mean, if you read Roman authors, they basically thought that, yes, some commerce on very long distance may be a noble pursuit, but basically selling stuff is a matter which is only for thieves. They thought that basically dealing with money at any level meant debasing yourself. We don't believe that any longer. We are in a business school, so we believe that business is something which is worth pursuing, even as a matter of study. It's something you need to prepare yourself to. Can be a noble goal, can be a vocation in your life to be a good business person. So this changes. And when we talk about ideas and culture, it's not just books. It's a whole bunch of stuff. This is just to prove you how good I and Gemini are when we work together. So The Economist, the newspaper, the cafe culture, in which people started to debate, to discuss ideas like we're going to be doing in this series of seminars. Opera, movies, about the importance of, somehow being the agent of your own life, of being free in that sense. And why is freedom so important for what we saw before, for economic growth? Well, in this picture you can see Professor Bruno Leoni at dinner in Japan. Professor Bruno Leoni is the not very skinny person in the middle. There's a picture taken in the 60s because I want to show you a quote by Professor Leoni that actually comes from his last published paper. I mean, Leoni was an Italian legal scholar, he was a lawyer, but he was very interested in economic matters. And he wrote this paper, this article, about the notion of liberty. Is the notion of liberty something which is exclusively Western? Is the idea of freedom something that pertains exclusively to Europe and North America? Leoni's answer to that was no. He thought that men are always free by their own nature, in the East as well as in the West. Why is that important when it comes to the economy? Yesterday marked the 250th anniversary of a great book, one of the few books that you can genuinely say this book has changed the world, which is The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, published on March 9th in 1776. And the main concept, the main idea of Smith is that the great engine of economic progress is the division of labor, is specialization, is the fact that people can attend to very specific tasks and get very good at those. And so other people can benefit from the fact that they got very good at the task they chosen for themselves. Smith did not think, as other people in history, Plato, for example, that we have the division of labor because we are different. Very smart people are professors. I'm kidding. That's no longer the case, clearly. And, you know, you're born a doctor or you're born a baker. That's not the case. Smith thought that human beings are pretty much the same, more or less. But the moment in which they specialize, they train, and they can become very good athletes, very good doctors, very good businessmen. And the moment in which people specialize, we can all benefit from their ability to do stuff well. And this way, through specialization, through the division of labor, the economy grows. And this is strongly connected with freedom, as Professor Leoni points out in this beautiful quote. Let me read it. A very important corollary of this is that the more complicated the action, the more freedom is needed by the individuals who have to act. And the more one needs to, and the more one needs of the action and collaboration of other individuals, the more freedom is necessary for all of them to act and collaborate as requested. Leoni's point here is basically that, you know, if you live in a very small village and you don't trade with anybody, and you're living in a subsistence economy, so you're basically eating the egg your hen is producing, and drinking the milk your cow is producing, you don't need that much of economic freedom. It's a very simple economy. It's a barter economy. But when you need to make this, and you need to make the mic that we're using, when you need to feed 8 billion people every year, you need a lot of creativity to be put into production decision-making. It's not that simple. You know, we always tend to consider the action and thoughts of the businessman, of the entrepreneur, as very easy. They're not. They require constant change, adaptation, evolution. And for that to happen, you need these people to be free. And the fact that they're free produces tremendous benefit for all of us, even those who are not CEOs or businessmen or entrepreneurs. So this culture that made this possible is liberalism at the end. And I want to tell you just 3 things about liberalism. First, liberalism aims to limit power. Second, for this reason, historically speaking, liberalism is a reaction. And third, liberalism is an acquired taste. And this explains why we're having seminars in order to spread it. So, aims to limit power. These are some classical liberal superheroes: Adam Smith with The Wealth of Nations, Thomas Jefferson with the lightsaber, and so on and so forth. They're all fighting something that happened in Europe, and there was the emergence of absolutism, the emergence of the modern state as a single point of command and control of a society. Liberalism is by and large a reaction to all of this. Its idea is that people should be regulated, their lives should be regulated in a way which is as much independent from discretionary power as possible. So I'm going to be quoting to you my favorite classical liberal theorist that actually gave you a wonderful one-line definition of the liberal goal. Is Nobel laureate Robert Zimmerman, also known as Bob Dylan. And this comes from a song, 1965, "Don't follow leaders, watch the parking meters." So the idea is that you do have a system of regulation of society which is independent from discretionary power. It is not the almighty leader deciding what other peoples have to do. It is a reaction. I've already told you what liberals were reacting against. Well, in England, according to some people, and perhaps rightly, the birthplace of liberalism, it was a reaction against the national church, a reaction against the fact that the church was the church of the state. Of course, the reaction went a little bit too far. It was a reaction against, absolutist monarch, like Louis XIV in France. And it was a reaction against a view of the economy in which the good of many was subordinated to the good of the state. This wonderful actor is impersonating Jean-Baptiste Colbert in a TV series called Versailles. So, this is something important because, lots of time people emphasize that liberalism is plural. It has many, many different nuances, different school of thought, people that very often react one against the other and contradict each other. It is true that classical liberalism is not a religion of the book. You don't have a plan for society, which is coming out as a great liberal classic. Because of that, because liberal authors were mainly reacting against things that they saw as abuse of power. And to react against these things, to react against these abuses of power, they basically looked around and they searched for institutions and customs and ideas that were available before and used them in order to save some space for individual liberty. And lastly, it is an acquired taste. No society is born liberal in history. No baby society with the face of John Locke. Let me just give you a little bit of an analogy. A great child, missing a D over there, a great child psychologist, Jean Piaget, pointed out 1 century and some years ago that there are two different kinds of morality that the children are developing. There is what he called heteronymous morality, top-down morality, which is basically mom is right or dad is right. It goes as far as that. This coming from the outside. The child has no understanding of mutual respect, of autonomy, of the possibility of negotiating the rules. It takes them as they get into his life. But then at a certain point in your life, around 10 years old, at the time of Piaget, maybe earlier on or later on these days, I don't know, the children develop some kind of thing that he calls autonomous morality. And in this new set, in this new mindset, rules are seen as something which is negotiable, which is agreed upon, and most importantly, which is based upon the respect of their peers. It's no longer mommy is right, but it's Giovanna and Enrico and Alberto deserve some respect. I need to give them some space, even if they do something I do not necessarily like. This transition is very similar to the sort of transition classical liberalism highlights, which was expressed back in the 19th century with a very famous sentence by a lawyer, Henry Sumner Maine. from status to contract. It means that in earlier societies, in the sort of tribal society we all went through, your position in life is determined by where you were born. It's your family, it's your clan, and so on and so forth. And the best that the ancient world is promising you in terms of personal satisfaction is to be at ease with what you're given. There's no way out and there's no way up. What happens instead in the world we've seen, in the world of the hockey stick, in the world of modern economic growth, is the fact that, of course, it's still quite important where you're born. Okay, it's better to be born in Trieste than in most places around the world. But you have some latitude. You have the possibility of improving your own conditions. The station of your life where you're going to be living is not exclusively determined by your birth. And that's a major difference. Of course, some problems come with it. And this is perhaps the biggest problem all of us have, psychologically speaking, with liberty. Is that we like liberty insofar as liberty is providing us with the possibility of being respected, seen as having dignity. But at the very same time, liberty is exposing our weaknesses. If we live in a society in which everything is fixed, in which you cannot move up, you cannot move down, you can just blame destiny, and that's it. But if you live in a society in which you do have some freedom, and you do have some economic freedom, and, as it happens to all of us, at some point you dislike the choice you made before, you end up blaming yourself. And this is something we don't know, we don't want, we don't like. So, on the one hand, we like the excitement that comes out of liberty, but on the other hand, we are fearful. We regret the fact that if we are free, we will end up being responsible for our own choices. And that is something we need to struggle with in our daily lives as well as when we talk about politics. Okay, thank you so much for not snoring at my presentation.
Thank you, Alberto Mingardi. And now we are listening to, we're going to listen to Emma Galli about the figure of the Luigi Einaudi, Einaudian liberal economic theory, but first of all, you will introduce as the figure of Luigi Einaudi. Emma Galli is full professor of finance and teaches finance, local public sector economics and finance, and comparative tax systems, and she's also the director of the scientific committee of the Luigi Einaudi Foundation. Thank you.
This first meeting in Trieste, in this splendid context. Well, I cannot promise not to put you to snore because, I don't have images, and sometimes images are very helpful to keep, attention, but I try to keep your attention as well, just, talking about the contribution that the Luigi Einaudi's thought can still give to the public debate about the European integration process. Just, a few words about his biography. I'm sure that everybody knows who is Luigi Einaudi, but just, to recall a few things, I think it's important to introduce also his liberal economic theory. Why? Because, Luigi Einaudi has been a prominent figure in the Italian economic and political culture of the 20th century, and he played different role. And recalling the role that he played at that time in economics and in politics, I think is important because it's something which is reflected also in his scientific ideas. Luigi Einaudi was an academician, so he was professor of public finance at the University of Torino. He played several institutional roles. I just, remind you that he was governor of the Bank of Italy, Ministry of Finance and Treasury, Ministry of the Budget, and most importantly, he was the first president of the Italian Republic. He was also a public intellectual because he was the editor of two journals, scientific journals, Riforma Sociale and Rivista di Storia Economica, and he was also journalist of two leading newspapers like La Stampa and Corriere della Sera. Einaudi spent crucial decades of Italian history. He experienced both World War. He experienced the crisis of the liberal democracies, so liberal institution following the First World War. He experienced also personally the advent of fascism, the Great Depression of 1929, and also the economic miracle. And those events, I think, that played an important role in shaping his theoretical thinking. Einaudi combines the classical liberal economic principles with a very strong commitment to democracy and to European federalism. And I'll get to the European federalism at the end of my speech. It was part of the tradition of the European liberalism, drawing ideas and inspiration by the British and Scottish liberal thinkers. Luigi Einaudi had a very wide scientific productions, newspaper production, and actually his way to write is very pleasant and ironic, and I would suggest, to read the original pieces by Luigi Einaudi, because, the ideas that I'm going to discuss with you today are very much presented by him, better than I can do it. So I really invite you to read the original books and articles and newspaper articles. But, what I'm trying to do today is to select some issues which I believe are still relevant today, as I mentioned in the debate about the evolution of the European integration process. First of all, I would like to focus on a methodological aspect of his thought. Einaudi considered liberalism not only an economic doctrine. Rather, it was more question of an ethic of responsibility that was grounded into the idea that individual freedom and human dignity are supreme values that overcome the historical contingencies. In his view, liberalism is not really just an economic principle, is not an ideological or normative liberalism, it is rather a method of thought and a method of action, because it's a method that provides a concrete solution to specific problem without, however, renouncing to its founding principles. Einaudi supports the conception of liberalism of the rules, which means liberalism of the rules based on the negative liberty of the individual who is constrained in the action, in the exercise of liberty by the institutions and rules which are democratically agreed by the individual, and that allow, in turn, individuals to pursue their interests in a cooperative way without reciprocal coercion. Another point that I think is quite interesting of the view of liberalism by Einaudi is that there is not an old and a new liberalism. There is only one liberalism, and each generation can face the problem of the time and places, putting the individual liberty at the center. Just to using the Einaudi words to clarify this point, I can tell you that in 1944, Einaudi was writing that liberalism is the doctrine who put over any other objective the elevation of the individual. So liberalism is a doctrine of limits, and I think that my colleague was already putting this focus on this idea of the limits. Liberal is the society where nobody can be deprived of the property without a legally based proceeding. So, in other words, liberalism guarantees the prevalence of the government of the law rather than the government of the people. How this conception of liberalism can be transferred into the functioning, the idea of the way the economy functions in Einaudi's view. Einaudi also, as I said, a liberal vision, which is both, classical and reformist in some respect, because, it calls for the elimination of the trapping of the bureaucracy, of the trade unions, of too invasive role of the state that may prevent the market from functioning, savings from becoming investments, labor from being remunerated according to its productivity, and also entrepreneurs from implementing their initiative. And in the Einaudi vision, the state intervention may create and may even strengthen all the ranks of position, which may lead to the modern, lead the society and the economy to a kind of ossification process and, economic and social decadence. And only whether the economy, only whether there are a kind of counterbalancement by the spontaneous forces of the market that, the economy may grow. And the only state intervention that Einaudi favor is the intervention by law, and so the development of uniform national legislation that can reduce the risk of monopoly, the risk of the ranks of position by entrepreneur. He expressed the need for a renewal of the bourgeoisie and the productive classes and support the family enterprises, small and medium firms that can, emerge and develop thanks to the functioning of the market and competition. Therefore, as I mentioned before, it was in favor of the laws and intervention, but only those that are necessary to guarantee and restore competition and private property. I'm going to read a very short piece by Einaudi on this point, when he says that liberals maintain the economic slavery is not economic slavery is not possible where there is competition, where existing entrepreneur owners of existing agricultural, industrial, and commercial business can be opposed by new entrepreneurs, by new traders, by new speculators on the future. Therefore, they don't want state intervention against property, which is savings, independence, and personal autonomy, family continuity, and the stimulus to economic advancement. But liberals want, because they've understood it, to get to the root of the evil, of the social harm, which is monopoly. So they want the sword of the law to fall on those who have built a trench around their own business, to prevent others from accessing that closed field. Since many, perhaps most monopolies are artificial because they are created by the law itself, the liberals want to abolish the prohibition, restrictions, duties, and privileges that prevent anyone who wants to work from being able to do it. Einaudi was very critical of the so-called state drillers, which are those entrepreneurs who, rather than operating according to the rule of the free market and also, face the entrepreneurial risk, they ask for and obtain by the government subsidies, bonuses, customs protection, and therefore, those laws granting, financial support to drillers are not really able to lead to real industrial development and favor rent-seeking activities and limited results. despite actually the public financial support. Now, another aspect that I think it's quite relevant still today in the Einaudi work is its ability to combine the economic theory with political concreteness. And that's something which is not easy to find in the economist works because, you know, sometimes theory is detached by real problems, detached by economy, society, and politics. And in Einaudi, these two aspects are very strictly combined. And the role that I mentioned before of being a professor, but in also being also a man of the institutions, are very much reflected in this scientific approach which constantly combine the two sides of the story. The economic theory, the attention to the events of his time, in a pragmatism that allow him to use the theoretical framework to interpret the changing reality in the economy and the politics. So this approach, which is a scientific approach that leads not only to a pragmatic approach to science, but also to a pragmatic approach to policy, is something that we can still learn from Luigi Einaudi, and we can still use, you know, when approaching economic problem. Einaudi was, you know, part of a group of scholars which are known as the Italian tradition of Scienza delle Finanze, which developed within the Anglo-Saxon liberal tradition from the end of the 19th century, so 1883, to the 40s of the 20th century. And among these people, among these scholars, Einaudi was very active, and he was, you know, sharing the idea that the discipline of public finance was necessarily an autonomous discipline. It has to be an autonomous discipline with respect to the economics, because he had the role at the time to identify the tools of the economic theory to manage the problem of the new Italian state after the unification process in 1861. And so keeping an eye to the necessity to be policy-oriented, so to use theory to policy orientation intervention. At the same time, it was recognizing also the need to differentiate the economic ideas from the legal, philosophical, political, and social ones. And he recognized, I think for the first time in the economic theory debate, the explicit consideration of the nature of the state in a kind of public finance decision-making process, underlying that the state is a complex organization that may present a different structure. It can be a kind of cooperative state or monopolistic state according to the way the power is organized within the state, and also is characterized by different actors, different relations that can be inclusive or parasitical or predatory. And according to Einaudi, democratic public finance process is necessarily has to be characterized by the competition of social groups and political parties, recognizing the economic and political nature of the financial activity of the government. So related to that, we can look at another example of this pragmatic liberalism of Luigi Einaudi, which concern the fiscal responsibility and public debt. I think that this is a quite important point today, especially for the European countries that has to comply with the new new European fiscal governance, which, you know, require some targets and rules to manage in a rigorous way the public finance. And so Einaudi discussed this issue of the fiscal responsibility related especially to the use of the public debt. And again, also with respect to the public debt, there is an attention to the time and to the place. So the issue is not only addressed on theoretical basis, but is addressed specifically as very much embedded into the, as I said, time and place. His reflection on public debt are very much related to the problem of those years of financing war expenditures, as well as financing the infrastructure which were necessary to sustain the industrialization process of the country. The debate at that time, I'm not going to focus too much on the specific technical issue of the debate, but just mention that the debate at that time was on the choice between public debt and extraordinary taxation when, there is a huge amount of expenditures that has to be financed. As I said, for the war, for the infrastructure. And in this debate, I have to recall that for the liberals of the Einaudi generation, the balanced budget principle was the pillar of an orthodox public finance management, which means that it was the major pillar that guaranteed a good management of the public finances of the state, and so was the guiding principle of the public finances in normal times. But, as a sense of, as an expression of the sense of responsibility towards the future generation, like, a good father of family would do. However, even though this principle was really a block, a very important, pillar of the management of the public finance, this does not impede Luigi Einaudi to recognize the necessity and also the legitimacy to find extraordinary tools to finance events that were as well extraordinary. And it does not attribute any moralistic stance to the issue of the public debt. It does not really recognize that public debt could be or should be condemned, but rather he evaluates its use just because it's a way to reduce the burden that the generation, the current generation, has to bear paying, extra taxes. And therefore, and that's something that, we should, take in our mind when we think of the current and contemporary problem of public debt that we still have in several European countries, not only in Italy, but also in several others, that, we could look at that in a quite pragmatic and functional way, which means that public debt is not a problem itself, at least is not in the Einaudi view, but it all depends on the way it is used. So it can be legitimate to be used because, as I mentioned, allow the tax burden to be spread over time, avoiding an excessive impact on taxpayer in short time. But the condition is that it is widely used in the allocation to productive and beneficial expenditure. I have to say also that in Einaudi thoughts, there is also a warning of also the dangers related to the budget surpluses, because when there are recurrent budget surpluses, which is something which is very rare actually in the contemporary economies, these may lead governments to spending which are not necessary and that are just a response to the request of or pressure of the interest group. So just to synthesize on the public debt issue, I believe that Einaudi suggests a kind of balance between prudence and intervention, between fiscal discipline but also attention to the extraordinary needs that sometimes communities and countries has to face. Finally, the last point that I think, it could be useful to recall today is that, again, related to public debt, is that, especially, in those years, public debt could be an educational, a guiding value for private saving because it was helping to develop a modern financial culture among small savers. And it's something that today we talk very much about it because today there are a lot of initiatives that try to develop the so-called financial literacy. So to, develop, among people of different, type, young, elderly people, men, women, to approach to the financial decision in a more competent and educated way. And so at that time, Einaudi was already seeing in the public debt a way to start a kind of financial education for small savers. I'm just going to conclude thinking of the idea of freedom that in Einaudi is strictly related with the pluralist and federal European perspective. Einaudi, liberal thought, saw the principle of freedom strengthened by the exacerbated nationalism in favor of European integration, drawing on the English federalist literature of the 30s as a kind of response to the conflicts and as a kind of project that goes beyond nations. He envisaged the necessity to transfer sovereign powers in defense. That's something which is very much debated, recently in commerce. That's something that we already accomplished in the European integration process, as well as in monetary policy, which is again, one of the major achievements that we had in the European progress, in the European integration process. This delegation, this transferring of more powers to the supranational level was something that, in some respect, anticipated the current architecture of the European project, and still, which is still, open to developments. Also today, Einaudi's legacy strongly invite to a reflection on the role of the institutions, on the role of the rules, which represents the legal framework that constrain the market economy, and at the same time guarantee the correct functioning of the market. Is a reflection on the functioning of the fiscal discipline of the public finances, and also, the need for an ethic and individual liberty and responsibility to guide public action. I think that Einaudi lessons are not so far away from our current days and are not just a legacy of the past, but they still remain a valid compass for navigating the dilemmas of the contemporary society. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Emma Galli, and the Luigi Einaudi thought and legacy could be also very relevant also if we study the Southeast European context. And we are now going to this topic, Southeast Europe, between history and European integration perspective. I have to, before I give the floor to Arrigo Bonifacio, I have to apologize for this adjustment to the program because Ezio Benedetti, the Professor Benedetti, cannot be present due to a bereavement, so Arrigo Bonifacio is contract professor in the history of international relations and at eCampus University. He will replace him. It's a very good professor, and he's also assistant professor at the University of Trieste, and Sapienza is in Rome. So thank you, Professor Bonifacio, for being here with us.
Thank you for inviting me. And thank you for the organization of this event, and thank you to the MIP for hosting the event, and to the Foundation for these dialogues, those very needed dialogues about liberalism in nowadays Europe. So basically, the topic is quite clear. And let's try to face all these parts of the topic. So let's start from Southeastern Europe. Well, Southeastern Europe, or the Balkans, which is also a name which is very often given to this area of Europe. So, basically, we have to think about this part of Europe, this peninsula of Europe, as one of the historical regions of Europe. Europe is made up by many different regions, which are sometimes very clear to define. Let's think about, for instance, the British Islands, and sometimes very unclear to define. One of these very hard to define regions in Europe, maybe the hardest one, is Southeastern Europe, or the Balkans. So first of all, we have to think about that we have not a clear and defined border for this area. And here, just in Trieste, it's very clear to underline this, because we could be in the Balkans, or we could be also not in the Balkans, but also we're in Central Europe, for sure. We also in the Mediterranean, and also in the Italian physical region. So basically, Trieste is the brightest example for understanding the difficulty of shaping borders in Europe, and the difficulty to, if you want to separate Europe into different areas and places. So that's why I also think that Trieste is a very interesting place to start this project of liberal dialogues. So, anyways, when we think about Southeastern Europe or the Balkans, we have some ideas about that. Summing up, we can say that it's this peninsula between the Adriatic Sea and the Aegean and the Black Sea, where a lot of peoples live. It's one of the most diverse regions of Europe at all, maybe the most diverse region of Europe. And once again, here in Trieste, it's another, if you want, a little sample of this diversity. Well, we cannot face, it's self-evident in a couple of minutes, all of the history of this area, but summing up, it's very important to keep in mind a couple of things. So first of all, you already mentioned it, it's a very diverse area where we can find different peoples, which means different cultures, with different religions, different alphabets even, and so on. But besides these, we also can find very easily some characteristics that are shared by all of these peoples. Last but not least, the fact of being a European area with a clear, defined European culture. Well, another characteristic that unfortunately the Balkans share with other European areas is that this area, especially in the last century, has faced many wars, basically. And violence has often been a tool for political debate, let's call it debate, in this area. And unfortunately, it has been the case until very few years ago. I'm a little bit elder than you, and I remember when I was a kid, the war, just a few kilometers from my home. And unfortunately, war came back in our continent again a few years ago, but we won't deal with that aspect right now. Let's focus on Southeastern Europe. we summarize the history of the Balkans, so now let's try to focus on nowadays and on the perspective of this area. So most of the countries or states of this area successfully integrated into the European Union in the last 40 years, basically. The first one was Greece, Slovenia followed, Romania, Bulgaria, and later Croatia too. However, we can say that the core of this region is still out of the process of European integration. And it's important to face the issue of the European integration in this area for many reasons. So before, we were talking about security needs for both those countries and the European Union. So apparently, being surrounded by European Union countries, all of which are also NATO countries, might look as a guarantee of security, which isn't the case. It's not enough to guarantee the security and stability of those countries and the surrounding European countries. For many, many reasons we will face very quickly together. So first of all, we know that these countries, most of which stayed out of the process of European integration, also stayed out of the process of NATO enlargement, basically. Indeed, besides the Republic of North Macedonia and Albania, and nowadays Montenegro, all the other countries that didn't join the European Union aren't also a member of the NATO. And in these countries, we are facing, it's quite clear, many external influences, not only the influence of European Union countries, which still is an intra-European influence, but a totally external influence too. Let's think about, for instance, the Russian, Chinese, Arabic, Turkish influence, as well as, of course, the American influence, the United States influence, the Canadian influence, and, why not, Japan, which heavily invested in the cooperation with Balkan states. So we have many different actors of the international community which are trying to affect the politics of those countries, with different interests, for sure, which could bring us back to the clash of interests that sometimes in Europe has led us to the war, which is something that should be avoided, for sure. And this, I think, underlines quite well the very first reason we have to deal with this issue. This is the most important one, like we mentioned with European integration. First of all, a project of peace. But then also we have to face about other aspects like economic security and stability. Of course, integrating these countries within the European Union might help also on this aspect. So both the economical and political aspects we see, they also meddle and can be very easily paired. Well, now let's face not all of these regions, but just to let's focus on the countries that stayed outside the process of European integration, to try to underline together which one are the main problems that both those countries have to face, and we, as Europeans, have to face together with those countries. Let's start from the closest one for us, from Trieste, which is Bosnia and Herzegovina. So, Bosnia and Herzegovina is also one of the most delicate cases we have to face. I'm gonna be a little bit realistic, and let's face to the reality together. The territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina is a territory that was basically created by the communist Yugoslavia in order to prevent the breakup of Yugoslavia. Nowadays, that country, which was the country where we unfortunately witnessed the worst case of war during the 90s, is basically based on the balances created by what we could name a ceasefire, basically, the Dayton Agreement of 1995. Basically, in 1995, the international community, thankfully, stopped the war, which is, once again, the most important thing: stop the war and make peace be a reality and not just a dream. However, that country was divided into separate entities, and the Dayton Agreement created a system that is basically, well, hardly fits with the Copenhagen criteria for joining the European Union, and also, we can say, hardly fits with liberalism somehow, because basically we still have the High Commissioner, basically appointed by the international community, and the local government is based basically on an ethnic division, which is not something, let's say, we can accept in the long term, and especially which is not something that fits with European Union criteria for integration, and also poses some questions to the maintenance of peace, as we know. Especially, I'm talking about the contrast between the two entities, so basically the Serbian Republic and the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which are the two, of course, entities of this federal state. So let's move southward, and let's face the other big issue of the other countries that didn't join the European Union. First of all, let's think about Serbia. Talking about Serbia means talking about Kosovo too, it's self-evident. And this is a very important issue for many, many reasons. First of all, not all of the European countries recognize Kosovo, which means that on one side, this issue has to be solved if you want to obtain a European Union enlargement in this area, concerning both Kosovo and Serbia. On the other side, we have to think about that Kosovo has so far been one of the main tools, both for basically the Russian propaganda in the Balkans, and on the other side, for preventing European integration in Serbia. Serbia, for instance, is a country very likely like Turkey, where the local population was basically very positive about European integration. Also, the current government of Serbia has always have, at least officially, but still, that single Kosovo issue has prevented the process of European enlargement in that area, and is still posing very, very big threats to all of the process in the region. Also, we experimented it in last years, became a tool for foreign powers, for non-European powers to enforce their influence in the area, especially China, basically. We know the current government of Serbia has developed a very good relation with China. Well, let's move to very related countries. So basically to Albania, North Macedonia, and Montenegro, which are basically sometimes similar concerning the threats we are facing and we will have to face, and on the other hand, of course, unique, like any country in the world. Well, let's start from Albania. Albania, from some point of view, might be the easiest candidate. It's already a NATO member. Most of the problem that Albania has faced in the 90s seem to be solved. However, there are still some problems related, of course, to the Albanian population living outside the territory of the Republic of Albania. Basically, Kosovo, not only, most of northwestern North Macedonia, the former Fyrom, but we have to say North Macedonia every time now, and also in the southern of Montenegro. So this is apparently once again one of the big national issues we faced in the 20th century, striking back. So a problem that hasn't been solved years ago is coming back to our present issues and threatening, if you want, the perspective of European integration in that area. So we've talked about North Macedonia, and let's talk about also this country apparently is quite ready, let's say, for European integration because it's a NATO country right now. It solved the denomination problem with Greece, has international recognition. However, it still has to face many difficulties related both to the large number and the huge entity of the local national minorities, and because of the relation with the neighboring countries. Well, last but not least, let's face now Montenegro, which is also a NATO country, but still has, we've seen it in recent years, some problems related to both the internal politics and stabilities, and also, if you want, it's a country that has faced a strong influence by China. Let's think about, for instance, the motorway of Montenegro, which was built by China, basically. So, all this country, we've seen it, they all share similarities, which are basically very dangerous for the European integration process, and not only, also for stability. Because when we think about what the minority issue or the border issue sometimes meant, just until the 90s, so only less than 30 years ago, those were the perfect recipes for war. And not only war, for instability in the economic, social, demographic aspects. So basically what is needed for both those countries and for also our countries as European Union countries is for sure a process of integration that's capable to face with the specificities of this area. Have our institutions so far been able to solve those problems? Well, that's a good question. If we face just a few kilometers from here, the border issue between Slovenia and Croatia, both European Union countries, we see that even European countries of the Balkans haven't solved all of the issues that divided them for so many years. So this, I think, underlines the problems of the non-European Union countries and the problems of enlargement towards those countries. So basically, I'm an historian. I'm much more used to make questions than to provide answers. That's not my job. Answers should be provided by politics. And today I'm not here as a politician, nor as a representative of a government. However, I would like to share with you some little perspective. Basically, I think that there are, and there is, and there must be a huge potential about the European integration in the Balkans. I really think that the future of the area will be within the European Union. I think, and I wish, that our institution should be more proactive, should be, if you want, is also more flexible, and should face the many border, minority, and institutional problems we have in the Balkans with the main aim of guaranteeing peace in our continent, stability, and also economic prosperity. From this point of view, and I will close, I pledge. From this point of view, Italy has been, and I think will be in the future, one of the main protagonists of this process. In many phases, from the breakup of Yugoslavia and even before, in the process of integration of Greece, Italy, also maybe for geographical reasons, we partly are in the Balkans, and Italian minorities live in at least 3 Balkan countries are an autochthon minority. I'm talking about Slovenia, Croatia, and partially Montenegro. So maybe also for the direct interest of Italy, Italy has been one of the main leaders in Europe in promoting this process of European integration in southeastern Europe. And I think, as I mentioned, it will be also in the next years. We have some evidence and here, let's step back to Trieste, also in the European Union, in the Italian foreign policy. Let's think about that there are two main regional organizations concerning the Balkan countries that haven't joined the European Union. One is the Central Europe Free Trade Organization, and the other one is the Central European Initiative, sorry, the old hexagonal and so on, which is based right here in Trieste. So, this is self-evident, I think, to explain the interest that the Italian Republic has to promote both the European integration towards the Balkans and to promote the role, the central pivotal role of Trieste in this role. And Trieste, and also, if you want, Gorizia, where very often the Italian government hosts the foreign ministers of the Balkan countries. So, as I mentioned before, as an historian, I mostly have questions, much more than answers, but I think and I hope that we could draft a brief sample of the many, many questions that we have to face concerning Southern Eastern Europe and European integration. And if you have any questions, of course, feel free to just ask. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Arrigo Bonifacio. Now I will give you the floor to the audience for some questions, if you have some questions. Meanwhile, I would like to communicate that some people are following us also on internet, remotely. There are people from Belgrade and also Tirana following us. We are today here in maybe 50 people, but in Ljubljana and also in Belgrade, Podgorica and Tirana, we will meet other people, other young people, other students, and yes, our goal is also to build a network. So thank you also, Professor Bonifacio, also our Southeast Europe Observatory. We are convinced that Southeast Europe is not the periphery of this continent. It is not only on the other side of the Adriatic Sea, it is also across the border here in Trieste, beyond also Slovenia and Croatia. It is an integral part of the Europe. And it's important to build studies and to build networks because also of security reasons and because it's part of also of our identity. Are there questions? Maybe? No questions. Yeah, maybe one question. Maybe we have a microphone, or how are we organized? Oh, here. I'll take it. There.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. And thank you, Professor, for your speeches. I have a question for Professor Bonifacio. You said that, according to you, the future of countries, the Western Balkans, is within European Union, and that we should have more flexibility in our institution. What do you mean with flexibility? I mean, according to maybe economic criteria, so to let this country be part of the European Union. And a question in general, maybe, what do you think could be and should be the role of youth and students or civil society in this process of integration and European cohesion, and I know there are lots of opportunities. For example, the University of Trieste is part of Einaudian, which is a big association it is like an association of the biggest universities in the Adriatic Union, excuse me. So, what was what do you mean with flexibility of institution? And according to you, the support and the engagement youth can have in this area so as to promote European cohesion and integration of Western Balkans in the European Union, which are inside the space in Europe. So it should be strategic to have them with us and to be all a community inside the European Union. So thank you.
Thank you for your question. So basically, those are two questions. I will answer first of all to the flexibility question. So basically, sometimes I'm thinking about Bosnia, especially Bosnia and Herzegovina. The European institutions have focused on maintaining the status quo, the current legal and therefore political balances. After 31 years from the signing of the Dayton Agreement, we still are there, basically. The High Commissioner is something that in other epochs, let's say 150 years ago, would have been called maybe a protectorate. So, as I mentioned before, I'm not a politician. I'm not here to provide political answers, but I'm here to highlight the problems. And that's a problem, for instance. And solve this problem, of course, solve also the democratic issue, and which is beneath that problem, I think is the only way leading to the European integration of Bosnia and Herzegovina. I don't see any other ways, also because otherwise this wouldn't fit with the criteria of Copenhagen. So that would be unfeasible for the European Union acquis communautaire. That's an example. We could face also some other examples, and to sum it up, one very interesting point will be the Kosovo issue. Maybe after more than a quarter of a century since the bombing of Belgrade and many years of independence of Kosovo, it's almost 20 years, in a couple of years, we will, it should be better to think about something new and not to get stuck in basically a diplomatic stalemate that's dating from the 90s. Concerning the role of the youth, the other questions. Well, basically, there are nowadays many opportunities, but there is still a very huge imbalance. You're free to move to the University of Zagreb, for instance, for doing your Erasmus or so on, if you want to move a few hundred kilometers further within the same motorway and move to Belgrade, for instance, or Novi Sad for studying, you need a visa. And mobility, especially the mobility of the youth, is very important and has been, we know, one of the main tool and asset of European integration. I think we all agree that the Erasmus program has been one of the best program ever of the European Union, which actually created European citizens, European thinkers, European leaders. Southeastern Europe still doesn't have this opportunity. You need a visa for studying in Belgrade, for studying in Sarajevo, for studying in other universities. There is a very limited visa-free system within the 180 days, but that's basically for holidays. This region doesn't benefit of the free movement of the students and of the youth in general. I think that's the very first point and the very first thing I would do if I only was a politician, and for sure. And then besides this, we know the youth has always been in the human history one of the main actors in bringing changement in societies. And we've seen also in the manifestations in the Balkans in the recent years that the youth are the protagonists of the changement. And however, to move forward, we need something more, we know. Let's see if something will move forward, and the role of the youth, which I think will in any case be positive. Let's have a look to what will happen. Thank you.
So we will try to make a network, to build this network, and we hope that we give also the, instruments to these people to be a very active part of a change. So are there other questions, maybe? Are there no ring? I don't think so, maybe. Okay, so thank you very much. I think that we are coming to the end, so thank you. And thank you all for the attention. I will remind also that all information about the project you can find on the website. I will ask you also to leave your email address before you go, so we keep you informed about our next events, and we can also provide a link for the participation on our next events. And also I would like to remember before we go that after this lesson you can just submit your reflection, your written report very shortly about your idea of Europe, and a scientific committee will evaluate your written report, and the winners then are invited to join the Trieste annual forum. That will be held here in September with the representatives of European institutions, ministers, and experts. Just follow us on our website and support us, and to be part of this network among young people in this area. And we rely on you, maybe future European leaders, to fulfill these European projects. So thank you for your attention, and have a great rest of the day.